Councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the City's Public Agenda Briefing Forum. My name is Councillor Margaret Thomas and I will be chairing this forum. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on this evening and share this message from the Noongar elders. Kaya kaya Brodius, Marman and Yoks, Nuna de Mort, Nitchakul and Nullamiah, Kalamunda Budja, Yayi, Nanjurapan, Wajulas Coolan, Jina, Nuna Danicha, Nunga Budja, Nunga Burdias Kura, Yayi, Birda, Cadillac, Birda, Kaya, Yunga. Hello, welcome to our leaders, men and women who have come to our place today this evening, and I'm happy to see you all standing on Noongar land of their leaders past, present and future. Thank you. The operation of this forum is in accordance with the City's adopted Public Agenda Briefing Forum policy and procedure and is governed by the provisions of the Local Government Act, Standing Orders and Rules of Conduct. This Agenda Briefing Forum will provide the opportunity for elected members to be informed and seek additional information on matters prior to the presentation of these items to the next Ordinary Council meeting for consideration and decision. This meeting is also live streamed and I would like to welcome those watching remotely. Attendance, apologies and leave of absence, the CEO.
Through the Chair, we are all present and accounted for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And declarations of interest, please.
I've received one declaration from Councillor Giardina in regard to item 10.1.1, the Crystal Book Concept Plan, declaring an impartiality interest. Councillor has a family member living in that particular area. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no announcements by the member presiding without discussion, and I don't have any public questions due to the fact that the City will not be receiving public questions or statements on the item, the Crystal Brook Concept Plan item tonight, as we have set aside next Tuesday just for that, so that we have plenty of time to listen to all the questions and deputations. So thank you. There are no public statements. There are no public submissions received in writing. Are there any petitions received? No. So we can move on to the items, and we start with the Crystal Book Concept Plan. So we ask for somebody to give us a report on that. Director of Development Services.
Through the Chair, thank you for the opportunity to present on the Crystal Brook Concept Plan. We have a number of items on the agenda for November. That includes a plan for the control of cats within the City of Kalamunda, a proposed scheme amendment and built form design guidelines for the activity centre plan for Kalamunda, and a review of the guided development scheme for Wattle Grove Cell 9. The project area for the Crystal Brook Concept Plan is generally bound and serviced by the major arterials of Welshpool Road East and Tonkin Highway. The site is also bordered by the city's southern boundary with the City of Gosnells. The site's approximately 15 kilometres as the crow flies from the Perth CBD, approximately 2.5 kilometres from the Forestfield District Centre and 6.5 kilometres from the Kalamunda District Centre. In terms of its strategic planning context, the Crystal Brook Concept Plan has been identified since 2010 in the City's approved local planning strategy as an urban investigation area, and that's shown by the white background plan with the red line markings to the left. The draft sub-regional planning framework in 2015 identified a significant portion of the project area as urban expansion. Subsequently, the final version of the sub-regional planning framework in 2018 identified a broader area, and the project area was defined through including an additional portion of land adjacent to Hartfield Park and in between Welshpool Road East, and that's shown on the blue with the area shown in pink to the bound north of Welshpool Road East. In terms of the process to date, This is a summary. The area was identified in the Local Planning Strategy 2010 as previously identified as urban investigation. A feasibility study was funded and prepared in 2017-18. The Wattle Grove South feasibility study was finalised in July 2018 and identified a number of land use options and recommended preparing a district structure plan subject to community consultation on land use options. Community engagement occurred in late 2018, which included a vision and values workshop, and a number of petitions were received and tabled to council. In February 2019, a notice of motion was put forward to initiate a community engagement and concept planning process that explicitly excluded the potential for industrial development options over the area. And in 2020, a concept planning process and community engagement process was embarked on. The resolution of council from February 2019 is shown on the screen, and in summary, it requested the CEO to create a budget allocation to undertake a comprehensive community consultation program to determine the level of community support for a variety of land use concept plans that incorporate the following design principles, and that was explicitly to exclude industrial land uses and reflect the existing knowledge and lifestyle and recreation opportunities of the area, look to seek for a high quality residential outcome that includes a range of densities, include an appropriate amount of commercial development based on best practice design principles, retain existing vegetation and tree canopy cover wherever possible, consider tourism development opportunities and embrace the aspects of the area including environmental, social and financial, provide modern sustainable housing design principles and renewable energy capture and water sensitive urban design wherever possible, and include the area north of Bolshpur Road East as spoken to earlier. The concept plan was prepared and it was advertised to the community with a series of workshops, and the concept plan shown on the screen. Through the advertising, during May and June 2020, 214 submissions were received. Those submissions contained an array of opinions and views on the area. Some sought to retain the area as rural, others sought to rezone the area for urban, and there were various mixtures, interpretations of rural and urban makeups. 50 surveys were completed and 18 community attendees for an online information session. Some of the key issues that were raised through the community submissions included the identification of indicative roads, the identification of potential public open space, the identification of commercial uses, most notable the rural hub and eco-business corridor, the potential for the requirement for the resumption of land for public open space and the identification of high retention value and landscape protection areas. There was concerns with the perceived ambiguous and undefined land use terms, the various residential identifications and landscape protection and environmental land use identifications that were shown on the concept plan. And there was desire for the area to be retained as rural, and there was also a desire for the area to be identified as urban. Some submitters provided multiple submissions, and some parties had multiple submissions from each resident. Figures to the various submissions. There were some from outside the project area. Detail on rural preferences were not provided in many submissions. Some submitters expressed support for 2,000 square metre lots while also supporting a rural identification, and detail on urban preferences were not provided in many submissions, but there was some of those submissions identifying that they wanted the area to be identified as urban. In terms of the issues, I'll go through some of those and how we are seeking to respond to those through modifications to the concept plan. So in terms of the proposed indicative roads, the officers proposed to remove those indicative roads and make quite explicit within the report that the location of new roads, should areas subdivide, or should there be growth in the area, are to be identified at future detailed planning phases and not in the concept plan. In terms of the concern with the potential public open space, the officer's response is to remove the potential open space areas that are identified on the concept plan and make it explicit in the report that the identification of public open space is to be determined through any future detailed planning exercises. the identification of commercial uses, be it a rural hub or the like. The officer's response is to remove the identification of the rural hub and ensure that the report is explicit to state that a suitably sized non-residential centre, but not industrial, commensurate to the density of the population is to be defined at future structure planning stage should it occur and be subject to a future retail needs assessment. The eco-business corridor is to be classified as either landscape rural or landscape urban, and I'll go through into those in a moment. In terms of the concerns about the resumption of land for public open space due to the high retention value vegetation or the landscape protection identification, the response to this particular matter is to retain the identification of high retention value vegetation and medium retention value vegetation on the plan. The identification of those areas is as a result of ecological surveys that were undertaken on some of the properties and an analysis of existing data from the DBCA databases with an extrapolation of where environmental values are, even on properties that weren't surveyed. From the city's perspective, this is scientific data and should be shown on the concept plan. We should also state and explicitly put in the report, which is proposed as a modification, that the protection of high value vegetation in private or public ownership is to be determined during future detailed planning. We have sought to remove the landscape protection identification and embed within the modified concept plan a target for tree canopy cover for the urban identified area to be at least 20%. And this aligns with general guidelines within the metropolitan area that are adopted by other local governments and aligns with the draft urban forest strategy that is also presented on the agenda for this evening. In terms of the proposed ambiguous and undefined land use terms identified within the concept plan, that concern was raised through the submissions. The response to that is to remove all the perceived ambiguous land use terms and replace them with two simplified terms: rural landscape and urban landscape. And both of those landscapes are to exclude industrial uses. In terms of the rural landscape, it's to be defined as identifying areas that may have significant vegetation, areas that align with key ecological corridors, and identifies areas that may be suitable for subdivision but requiring sensitive site responses and interface treatments. Lots within the rural landscape identification may range from 2,000 square metres to 1 hectare and beyond, and it captures an array of land uses, including but not limited to special rural or rural composite, residential R2, which is a minimum land area of 5,000 square metres, residential R2.5, which is your traditional 1 acre properties, and residential 5, which is the 2,000 half acre properties, and not to include industrial or commercial. The urban landscape identifies areas where environmental and servicing constraints may be present, but on assessment does not, at this high level of analysis, impede development, subject to meeting the strategic objectives of the concept plan and ensuring sensitive interface treatments between land use typologies, being rural. These areas are generally suited to lots in the order of 2,000 square metres and above due to current servicing constraints, but smaller lot sizes below 2,000 square metres could be explored subject to the availability of services. The urban landscape is to capture an array of uses, including but not limited to residential, starting from R2, which is 5,000 square metres, and commercial, but any commercial land is to be commensurate to the density of the population, to be defined at future detailed planning should it occur, subject to community consultation and subject to a retail needs assessment, retail and sustainability needs assessment. The urban landscape is to be clear that it does not include industrial. The proposed modified concept plan is now shown on the screen. The area generally south of Crystalbrook and Easterbrook Road is shown as urban landscape, and generally north of Crystalbrook and Easterbrook Road is shown as rural landscape, with the environmental values identified through the scientific analysis undertaken by ACOM. The plan was referred to state government agencies and surrounding stakeholders. 2 state government agencies and Perth Airport responded. The Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage and the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions identified a preference for the key environmental values and Crystalbrook itself, to be protected in public ownership. In terms of Perth Airport, they recommended that all developments are insulated due to the predicted increase in aircraft noise over the area as a result of the third runway. And the Department of Education stated that population growth projections suggest significant pressure on primary schools and high schools in the locale, possible requirement for up to 2 schools in the area, subject to detailed further structure planning. In response to those agency submissions, the City has stated that the protection of environmental values, be it in public or private ownership, would be required to be determined should future detailed planning occur. The City recommends to insert a recommendation in the report that all developments are insulated appropriately in accordance with Perth Airport advice, and the identification of school sites are to be determined through future detailed planning. There are a number of options available to Council. Option 1 is to undertake modifications to the concept plan report and initiate preparation of a district structure plan and metropolitan region scheme amendment to rezone the area. A budget would need to be set aside for this to be undertaken, and that budget would be significant. Under this option, the City would be coordinating the detailed planning for the area, including future community engagement. The City would, in essence, be preparing planning proposals for the future development of the area. This option is not recommended. Option 2 is to cease further planning for the project area and note the modified concept plan and report. This option would see the City cease any further planning for the project area until Council resolves to recommence further planning, if it so chose to do so. Any future plans prepared by proponents, be it landowners or interested parties, would have regard for the community engagement undertaken, and its findings, and the outcomes of the modified concept plan and its report. This is the recommended option. There's a third option, and that's to cease detailed planning for the area and reject the outcomes of the concept plan and report. Any further planning by proponents would not have regard to the outcomes of the community engagement and concept plan, as it would have no status and would have been rejected. The option would see the City cease any planning for the project area until Council resolves to recommence planning on the matter, if it so chose to do so. This option is not recommended. The recommendation before Council is to note the outcomes of community engagement and public advertising and acknowledge that there are a range of views within the community for the future planning of the project area. It's to note the outcomes of the ecological report prepared by AECOM and its findings, and request the Chief Executive Officer to make modifications to the concept plan and the report in accordance with Attachment 1, which I've generally spoken to this evening, publish the modified document on the City's website, and inform all landowners within the project area once it's completed. Council's also recommended to note the strategic outcomes of the concept plan and report as proposed to be modified, and cease further planning for the project area as outlined in option 2 of the Council report. Questions?
Councillors, you will have a chance to ask more questions next week, but would you like to ask any questions now? Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, thank you, Madam Chair. Just thank you, Peter, for that presentation. Just trying to understand the difference between option 3 and option 2, in that you mentioned that option 3 says, oh, great, that any further planning by proponents would not have to have regard to the outcomes of the engagement. So all the work that the City's done, they would not have to have regard for that. Is that correct?
Through the Chair, through this option, it would be that the Council would reject the concept plan and the findings through that concept plan and the engagement process. So by rejecting it, it wouldn't have to have regard for it. The process wasn't accepted as presented.
Okay. So in reference to option 2, is that what you're talking?
No, reference to option 3.
Yeah, compared to option 2, is that correct?
That's correct.
So option 2 talks about ceasing further planning for the project area and note the modified plan and report. Okay.
It's on your screen, Councillor O'Connor.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to flick from one to the other. So my question, sorry Peter, my question is, the documents are already out there, they're already published on the City's website. So what's the difference between us ceasing now, if council chose to go that way, as opposed to adopting the recommendation.
Through the chair, the concept plan is proposed to be modified in response to community engagement. So if you chose not to modify the concept plan and reject it, there would be a draft concept plan that was out in the public realm, that submissions were received on, that had a range of opinions, and it wasn't responded to as a result of those opinions being expressed.
Okay, last follow-up question.
Sure.
So I understand that, but the current proposed modified plan is also published on the city's website, and I imagine will remain so as a historic document. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
But the status of that plan will be dependent on council's resolution.
Okay.
Are there
Thank
any
you.
other questions, councillors? Councillor Sewell?
Thank you for that, Director. I'm just wanting some clarity in terms of zoning changes. In terms of jurisdictions, who can change zoning? And if zoning is rejected at a local government level, what are the options in terms of having the decision by council reviewed?
Through the chair, there's the West Australian planning system works on generally two zoning systems, one being the Metropolitan Region Scheme, which is state government are the primary custodians of, and local planning schemes. Local planning schemes are to be consistent with the Metropolitan Region Scheme. So the Region Scheme is generally the first to be amended if it's to be changed. So the Metropolitan Region Scheme can only be amended, an initiation for its amendment by the West Australian Planning Commission, and that's subsequently approved by the Minister for Planning. Should council not support a rezoning of the Metropolitan Region Scheme amendment, the Commission would have regard for council's position. However, it is its prerogative to initiate an amendment, and ultimately the decision of the Minister as to whether they approve it or not. If a local government chose not to initiate a local planning scheme amendment, the Minister can instruct a local government to initiate one if the Minister so chose to do so. However, the local government's not obligated to initiate a local planning scheme amendment. If it chose not to, it doesn't proceed, but the Minister does have the powers to instruct and require the local government to initiate a local planning scheme amendment.
Follow-up question, Councillor Sewell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just in terms of getting clarity, so I have an understanding of how this works, so that would be a similar situation in terms of what Shire of Mundaring is dealing with when it comes to Stoneville.
Through the chair, I can't comment. I don't have full details on the Stoneville matter.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Boyd?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question for the Director, piggybacking off Councillor O'Connor's query in regards to option 2 versus option 3. I just have a query. Obviously, I understand that the consideration for the concept plan is the key here. Excuse me. What happens to the other reports, e.g. the environmental report, should option 3 be the option that council chooses?
Through the chair, the environmental report has been published on the city's website. That's factual information, scientific information. Irrespective of option 3, the environmental report is what it is.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Cooper?
Thank you. To the Director, in option 2, and I'm just trying to understand this, but at point B under the pros, it said that should landowners or private developer wish to proceed with the detailed planning of the area, they would need to have regard to the outcomes of the modified report. But then under the cons of option 2, it says the plan and the report are non-statutory documents. Therefore, the proposals can be put forward that may vary the principles and outcomes. Should the city not endorse the proposals that vary the principles and outcomes of the report, the WAPC can still approve these proposals. So I'm just trying to understand, it's a pro and it's a con. Am I missing something here?
No,
or
so
no?
through
Sorry.
the chair, the report is non-statutory. So this is it's not a formal planning proposal. It's a non-statutory plan for the future development of the area and what the future development of the area may pick up on in terms of its makeup and how that future development may look like. By modifying the report in response to submissions received and noting that report and having it available, any future proposals will pick up that report, note the significant journey that this project's been on for the past couple of years, the robust community engagement that's come about through that process, and have regard for that should any future proposals be prepared. Notwithstanding, if a proponent chose not to pick up on all the values in that report and put something alternative forward that may be contradictory to it, it's the prerogative of the Planning Commission to approve or otherwise ultimately that proposal. The city would have to process community engagement and the city's council would have an opinion on that proposal, but it would only be an opinion, and ultimately it'd be the Commission and the Minister that decide on the proposal and its form and makeup. The city and its council are not the decision-making authority when it comes to rezoning and structure planning and subdivision of development areas. It's the West Australian Planning Commission and, for the purposes of rezoning, the Minister for Planning.
Councillor Stella, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, through the chair. A follow-up to Councillor Boyd's question. Just a bit concerned about getting my head around the fact of the environmental study. If we adopt number 2, option 2, that puts inside the environmental study, inclusive in our recommendations, in our the concept plan that we have there, and therefore it, to a certain degree, should be adhered to, or at least utilised. If we go for option 3, does that exclude the significance or importance of that environmental study as something that should be taken into consideration by any developer, whether it's an individual or whether it's an outside developer?
Through the chair, any future proposals for the area in whatever form or function would have to have regard to the environmental legislation that sits alongside the development and planning legislation. The environmental study surveyed properties and extrapolated information based on databases and aerial photography. That's factual information. Irrespective of what option, irrespective of what type of proposals put forward, those environmental features will have to be considered as part of any future development proposal in whatever form and function it is, and adhere to the environmental legislation that sits alongside the planning and development legislation.
So, follow-up question, if I may. So what we're saying in essence is that our study that we've put through, in essence, that is a good leading point for any future environmental study, and therefore it has the capacity to have some influence on our decision to support or not support some development aspect, even though they need, because they can come in and do their own and possibly come up with a different outcome to what we have.
Through the chair, the environmental study is revealed information on the area that has to be taken into account as part of any development proposal in whatever form or function.
I have a question. So option 2 says that we note we make the changes according to the community consultation, then we note this report, and then it just sits there and we don't do anything else. If nothing happens, if no developers or landowners come to us, how long would the environmental report, etc., be valid?
Through the chair, I'm not aware of any legislation that prescribes an expiry date on an environmental assessment or report, but through my experiences, when you start reaching 4 to 5 years, the environment changes, and the Environmental Protection Authority and DBCA may request that a resurvey is undertaken. As part of any rezoning, we have to be mindful that not every property was surveyed as part of our ecological report. So the EPA may not be satisfied with the amount of information that's in there, and any proponent would have to seek further environmental surveys over spring, and that report may be updated. An addendum 2.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any other questions? Councillor O'Connor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Peter, just going back to option 2 and 3, just trying to get my head around. So my reading of it, and I'll put this to you as a question, is it correct to say that the difference between option 2 and option 3 is, in option 2, we note the modified concept plan and report, and in option 3, we don't?
Through the chair, correct.
So my follow-up question is there any perception? Is there any truth to the perception that noting it gives it some sort of endorsement by council?
Through the chair, the way that the recommendation's phrased is that the plan's modified in a form in response to the submissions that were received through the process, and that council note that modified plan, so that it is information that's noted by council, and any further planning that occurs for the area will pick up that modified document. Option 3 seeks to reject the concept plan in its draft form and cease any further planning for the area. These are not the only options available to council. These are the options that officers believe are the most logical at this point in time, and there may be others that come about through councillors and what you think you may want as an alternative or a modified officer recommendation, and it may be a variation.
Sorry, in a short follow-up. In options, I don't see the words reject the plan, so I'm just trying to understand. The way I read option 3 is that we just stop at a point in time. I don't see the word reject, so is it somewhere else in the report, or?
No, option 3 states cease detailed planning for the area and reject the outcomes of the concept plan.
It's in section
92.
92.
Yeah, I'm looking. Oh, sorry, okay.
On page
Sorry.
Second part of the
43.
sentence.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, okay. Okay.
Are there any other questions, councillors? If not, we'll ask the Director of Development Services to tell us about cats.
No problems, we'll move on from that one. So item 10.1.2 is plan for the control of cats within the City of Kalamunda, and that really does go to show the variety of issues that my directorate deal with and the issues that the city deal with more generally. So the purpose of this report is for council to consider the possibility of preparing a cat local law in response to a notice of motion raised by Councillor Boyd, OCM 149/2020. The details of the report indicate that domestic cats can be just as detrimental to local wildlife as feral cats, and that cats living near bushland are likely to kill a wide range of native wildlife. The Cat Act allows for the registration, microchipping and sterilisation of cats, and that local laws can allow the designation of cat prohibited areas, fauna protection zones, and provisions for declaring cats a nuisance. There are a number of other matters that are outlined within the report. The recommendation is that Council receive the report in relation to the possibility of introducing cat local laws in response to the notice of motion, and request the CEO to progress the preparation of City of Kalamunda cat local law.
Councillors, do you have questions? Are there any questions from the gallery about this report, about the control of cats? No, thank you very much. We move on to 10.1.3, the Kalamunda Activity Centre Plan, Director of Development Services.
Through the Chair, this is a proposed scheme amendment to the local planning scheme and the formalisation of the design guidelines through the city's local planning framework in the form of a policy. The purpose is for Council to consider adopting the 2 planning documents for public advertising. Amendment 106 is in short a formalisation of the activity centre plan through giving it statutory effect through the statutory planning framework. It identifies land use it'll give effect to the land use classifications identified on the Kalamunda Activity Centre plan and corresponds to the local planning scheme. It introduces a general centre zone and objectives over the area to give effect to the details and the prescriptions within the Kalamunda Activity Centre plan, which has already been modified and adopted by Council. It will remove redundant and outdated provisions from Local Planning Scheme 3 and hangovers from previous district planning schemes prior to Local Planning Scheme 3, and rationalise existing and additional special control areas and restricted uses within the Kalamunda Activity Centre. It will not restrict land use permissibility within the area, but it will actually provide greater flexibility. The West Australian Planning Commission has requested that the City formally initiate this amendment to allow the progression of the Activity Centre plan. The built form design guidelines were accompanied with the Activity Centre plan, and this is proposing to bring those in to formalise within the local planning framework, and it's a document that's required to be given due regard in decision making for any future development within the Kalamunda Activity Centre. The built form design guidelines are generally reflective of State Planning Policy 7, which is Design WA, but have brought in localised elements that are reflective of the Kalamunda character and its characteristics that came about through the Activity Centre plan preparation process. A key feature of the built form design guidelines is restricting the height limits within the town centre to 3 to 4 stories, with the possibility to go higher depending on design solutions, whereas Design WA gives as of right up to 6 stories. So we are looking to articulate particular elements within these built form design guidelines that are contrary to state planning policy. It's to look at introducing performance-based assessments for developments and provides a useful assessment framework for the City's Design Advisory Committee should any major developments be proposed within the Activity Centre. It's proposed to be advertised for 21 days, and the rezoning to give effect to the Activity Centre plan is proposed to be advertised for 60 in accordance with the local planning scheme regulations. The plans on the screen I'll describe from left to right. The plan on the left is the Kalamunda Activity Centre plan, which shows a primary district centre core, which is the blue, surrounded by mixed use and residential densities. The centre plan is the existing zoning of the Kalamunda District Centre, which is generally reflective of the Activity Centre plan. However, you'll see in part of the Activity Centre plan there are expanded areas of commercial and mixed use, providing that flexibility and making up the different variations and mixtures of land uses to make up an activity centre. The plan on the far right is what the plan in the middle is proposed to be changed to, and the plan on the far right will give effect to the plan on the far left. The recommendation is that Council adopt both of these for the purposes of public advertising.
Councillors, questions? I have a question. You said something like the built form design guidelines are in contradiction to the state's?
Through the Chair, the state government's framework would allow up to 6 stories within a district centre, and through the engagement and through the city's opinion on the characteristic of Kalamunda, 6 stories wouldn't fit our character up here in Kalamunda. So we've sought to vary that through these design guidelines, restrict it to 3 to 4 stories, but also provide the opportunity to allow higher than 4 stories, but that's dependent on design solutions and outcomes.
So if somebody applied for something higher than what the city wanted, would they be likely to get it because the state would override us?
A development of that nature would likely be a development assessment panel type application because it would trigger those thresholds. And while this development assessment panel, again, has to have regard for the city's policy, it's not bound by it, and it would generally be bound by state planning policy, but to some extent it is only a policy position of the state as well, and the development assessment panel may go beyond what the state planning policy states too. So in those instances, for those major developments, decision-making power is not of the city's council, it's of a development assessment panel that has representation from the city's council on it and would have regard for our policy framework and the policy framework of the state government.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you. Thank you, Director. Just as a point of clarification, the multi-storey building on Barber Street and the multi-storey building on Stirk Road, is one 3 and one 4, or is it just simply an aspect of topography that makes the one on Stirk Road look higher?
Stirk Road's got the bobtail lizard out the front.
It does have that incredible bobtail lizard out the front, yes.
My understanding is that is 4 stories with basement parking.
That is 4, and Barber is 3. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Giardina.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Have we still got the same people on the Design Advisory Committee, or do we swap them around?
Through the Chair, from memory, and it is from memory, it's 5 years, and their terms are 5 years, and there will be a swapping around at the expiry of their terms.
Thank you.
Any more questions, councillors? Councillor Sewell?
It's just a zoning question. So what is the benefit to changing the current zoning into what's outlined in the plan, if then we're required to have up to 5 stories?
Through the chair, may I ask the question be rephrased? I haven't quite grasped that.
Okay. So why is it the intention of the City of Kalamunda to change the current zoning of the town centre?
Through the chair, that's to give effect to the activity centre plan, the Kalamunda Activity Centre plan.
Are there any other questions? Are there any questions from the gallery on the Kalamunda Activity Centre Plan, Scheme Amendment and Draft Local Planning Policy and Built Form Design Guidelines? No, thank you. We'll ask the Director of Development Services to tell us about Cell 9.
Through the chair, final presentation from me. So item 10.1.4 is the guided development scheme for Wattle Grove Cell 9. The review to the guided development scheme report has resulted in a decrease in the contribution rate from $24,100 per lot to $22,200 per lot. This is due primarily to a reduction in Western Power costs for Hale Road and an increase in the projected lots to be developed for the old Grass Trees Australia site. The slight reduction in Western Power costs and the increase in yield has spread the costs over a greater area, and as a result has resulted in a 10% reduction. Land value is still estimated at approximately $165 a square metre plus potential contingencies associated with any improvements on those properties. And since the last review, the land has been purchased for public open space and roads at 296 and 268 Hale Road, now completing the jigsaw puzzle to allow Brett and his team to finalise the Hale Road beautification project and finalise Woodlapine Brook. No submissions were received during public advertising and no modifications are proposed to the advertised version of the guided development scheme.
Are there any questions, councillors? Councillor O'Connor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Peter, just on the Western Power pricing, is that a detailed design figure?
Through the chair, I'll defer to Director of Asset Services.
Thank you. Through the chair, no, it's actually construction cost. They're underway at the present time.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Stallard.
Yes, thank you again through the chair. Just out of curiosity, are there any outstanding or potential infrastructure activities or areas that need to be done or are being put aside in infrastructure? I'm also referring to parks and the recreational areas. Are we missing any? Are they going to be covered within this process or not?
Through the chair, there are a number of public open space areas within the Cell 9 cell that does not have landscaping funded through the contribution scheme. The land component for the open space is funded through the contribution scheme, but the landscaping of those public open space areas isn't. There are opportunities, depending on the nature of subdivisions adjacent to those areas, to require, or for the city to at least request to require that developer bring them to a minimum standard, being grass, bollard and reticked. So at least they're in a minimum standard, and that has occurred in some parts of Cell 9. But in terms of the contribution arrangement or the guided development scheme, there are some areas that landscaping of public open space isn't included or funded, but the land component of it is. And that's a result of this scheme being some 20 odd years old now, and from its initial inceptions back in the late 90s, didn't have those areas of public open space included within them in terms of them being landscaped, but did have those areas included in terms of their land acquisition.
So if I follow-up question, in looking at the amount, if I'm working it out, how you calculated out the contribution from 17,529,000, which is 374 land parcels in that area. On those grounds, I know I've asked this before, and it's a frustrating part for me that we cannot utilise the funds that were there, or the amount that was originally there, the 24,000, to utilise to do some more, or to do some activity work on those public open spaces or recreational areas.
Through the chair, take your point, Councillor Stallard. The rates are reflective of the items that are included within the guided development scheme that are listed in the arrangement. Unfortunately, since this scheme's initiation in the late 90s, those landscape areas weren't included. Fairness and equity needs to be brought into the equation as well. And would it be fair to charge the 300 odd remaining lots for landscaping that the 600 odd other lots haven't been charged for?
A follow-up question, if I may. Certainly, it's an interesting moot point in one sense that they gain it, utilise it, and take advantage of it. I suppose what we're doing every year is reviewing what's needed to complete or to finish or to encompass the amounts that's needed for the development of an area. And surely, just because something was made such a long time ago, each year we alter, we change and review the contribution scheme to include or to make sure we cover what's required. To me, it just seems fundamental, and I still haven't quite accepted this one, and we've had differences on this before, that we are situated in a position where these reserve, or this area is not going to be developed by anyone in there. We will have to do it, and then they gain the benefit, as opposed to other areas and other ones that are happening in recent times. And to me, I'm just wondering whether that can be an arguable point to say why we should be doing something, or should have been taking a bit more to develop those sites. I still believe it's about $2 million to develop those at least a couple of areas that are going to have to come out of our pockets as a community.
Through the chair, if I may, Councillor Stallard, I did note earlier that guided development scheme is not necessarily the only process that the city can seek to have those areas landscaped, at least to a minimum standard. The adjacent subdivisions and developments that those public open space areas will be contained within, the city will be recommending that they are brought to a minimum standard. Ultimately, it's the Planning Commission that will decide whether it's fair and equitable that those subdivisions adjacent to the public open space bring it to a minimum standard. But at an officer level, I can attest that we will be recommending that they are brought to a minimum standard, so that cost isn't borne by the municipal base. But whether or not that follows through as a conditional requirement of subdivision approval, I'm not able to give you that assurity on.
Councillor Boyd, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just kind of along the same lines as Councillor Stallard to the Director, just wondering, is the DCP, I don't know if allows the right word, but able to assist with funding, I've got two things. One, footpaths, and the other one, something I've been suggesting and requesting for quite some time, is let's call them islands in the middle of the street with tree planting.
Director?
Through the chair, in regards to footpaths, if those footpaths are part and parcel of the roads that are included in the contribution scheme, namely Hale Road or Sheffield Road, then yes, they can be included. And they have been included as part of subsequent reviews, historic reviews. In terms of islands for tree planting on existing roads, no. On the new roads that are proposed to be built through the guided development scheme, namely Hale Road, depending on the design of that road, yes.
Follow-up question, Councillor Boyd?
Yeah, thank you. Follow-up question. So you just mentioned footpaths could occur on Hale and Sheffield, but the treed islands couldn't occur on Sheffield, only Hale? Is that the...
Through the chair, Sheffield's been constructed now out of the arrangement, so those islands wouldn't be able to be included. But Hale Road's yet to be built, still in design phase. It's not in design phase, tendered. But I believe there are islands with trees as part of that design. It's a boulevard.
Are there any more questions, councillors? Are there any questions from the gallery on the development scheme report for Cell 9? If not, we'll ask the Director of Asset Services to give us a report on the draft urban forest strategy, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, the Asset Services team are proud to present one report this month. I would like to introduce Rod Strang, our Manager of Parks and Environmental Services, who has been instrumental in preparing the report on the draft urban forest strategy. So I'll hand over to Rod.
Thanks, Brett. Good evening, councillors and fellow officers. I'd like to present the draft urban forest strategy. The purpose of this report is to advise on the progress of the draft urban forest strategy and to seek council endorsement to proceed to public consultation. The purpose of the urban forest strategy is to inform a series of actions primarily aimed at increasing the overall tree canopy coverage in the city of Kalamunda. The reason tree canopy coverage is specified is because it's measurable, and so is the increase in ground surface temperature when tree canopy coverage is reduced. The Kalamunda Environmental Advisory Committee, KIAC, has considered the draft urban forest strategy and their recommended changes are considered appropriate. It's recommended that council endorse the draft urban forest strategy for the purpose of community consultation. By way of some background, at the ordinary council meeting of 26 March 2019, council resolved to request the Chief Executive Officer to list for consideration in the draft 2019-20 budget a provision to prepare a draft urban forest strategy and commence community feedback on this draft by June 2020. Unfortunately, there were some hold-ups associated with COVID and it delayed the process. Also, that refers development of the urban forest strategy to KIAC to advise of scope, process and costs and principles of the strategy to include A, meet the objectives of the city's strategic community plan priority 2, Kalamunda Clean and Green. B, to develop a program for planting trees across the city. C, to demonstrate leadership in understanding in addressing the urban heat island effect, and also to provide more livable, attractive and sustainable communities. Additionally, to request the Chief Executive Officer to list for consideration in the draft 1920 or 2019-2020 budget an additional provision of $50,000 to the existing $116,000 budget to extend the existing tree planting program across the city. This was done and the trees have now been planted, and it's been backed up again this year, which is great. And also request the Chief Executive Officer to list for consideration in the long-term financial plan a sum to enable the implementation of the urban forest strategy once adopted by council. This slide shows the link between our strategic community plan, adopted local environment strategy and the draft urban forest strategy. Development and implementation of an urban forest strategy is an action out of our local environment strategy. It's a bit hard to read that slide, but just this doesn't really show. I'll move on to slide 4. The CSIRO heat map, it's a very useful image to show the average land surface temperature in each area of the city during the summer of 2018 and 19. If you see, you can pick out the colours and whatever in the top right hand corner of the legend there, you'll notice that the higher ground temperatures are in areas on the Swan Coastal Plain where tree canopy coverage is the lowest, so there's a direct correlation between ground surface heat and the absence of tree canopy coverage. And then out to the east on the plateau and scarp, the temperatures significantly decrease at the same time of the year due to the amount of vegetation out there and primarily the tree canopy coverage. Key actions in the strategy recommend increasing tree planting on the Swan Coastal Plain and emphasis of tree retention on the Scarp and Plateau. Other key actions are increasing tree planting in the city-managed reserves, including road reserves, and developing systems and processes to assist our community in increasing tree canopy. And the recommendation is the Council endorse the draft urban forest strategy for the purpose of community consultation.
Councillors, questions? Councillor Giardina?
Could staff give us a bit of a rundown on how they propose to consult with this throughout our community? And how much are they going to be sending out towards our neck of the woods, the Orchardist and what have you? They don't seem to be get much of the stuff out there in the past. I'm interested to see how they consult out there, how widespread it's going to be.
Who would like to take that? How are we going to consult?
The consultation will be handled by our communications area, and it'll be in keeping with consultation similar strategies, I would expect. If there's a...
Thank you. Through the Chair, I take Councillor Giardina's point that the understanding of getting into the orchardists and whatnot, and we'll take that on board and make sure that the communications plan covers as much of the city as feasibly possible.
Thank you. Question, Councillor O'Donnell.
I'm sure the answer is quite obvious. We talk about using the 2018 baseline data, but I'm mindful that it's nearly 2021 and the significant development has occurred in places where you've highlighted the Swan Coastal Plain. So I'm just wondering, how often is this data available? Is it kind of like every 2 or 3 years or something like that? I just wonder, we are obviously going to be worse than the 2018 data.
Through the Chair, if that's correct. Usually there's a decrease in canopy cover. It seems to be that the trajectory is that way. This particular map was the most recent CSIRO map available, and it's only just been released. I'm not too sure about how frequently that information is made available, but I can find out and get back to you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, councillors? Are there any questions from the gallery on the draft urban forest strategy? If not, we will ask our CEO to give a report on the library services review.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Library Services Review was conducted over the last 12 months. There's a requirement in the Local Government Act for the CEO to undertake service reviews of all core services within the city on a regular basis from time to time. I had noticed that there had not been a significant review of our library services done in the past, and so we certainly, through discussions with council, we've been talking about the future of libraries and community hubs and relocation of libraries. So it seemed timely that we would have a good look at our libraries and see where they were currently positioned, what they benchmarked like, what was the context and the quality within our libraries, and look at some areas of strategic delivery as well as operational improvement. So this review served two purposes: to not only to set some strategic direction for our libraries, but also to set operational direction for the staff to work with within the report. There are operational imperatives within the report, hence why it's a confidential attachment. And this what we're drawing on is really the strategic areas that we would like council to pursue to assist in the future planning and development of libraries. The city engaged an external consultant to work with the city staff over the last 12 months to have a look at areas such as how well our assets were holding up, what the workforce was operating like, what the resourcing benchmarking looked like, what the funding levels compared to other libraries were, and make an assessment to see if our libraries did actually reflect the changing needs of our community. So the provision of library services obviously was found to form a very important cultural and social practice for this city. Our libraries are loved by those that use it, but we did find that there's not as many people using them as what we would like to have used them. We found that they should be supporting learning, innovation, creativity and social cohesion, and we saw that those people that do use our library saw them as a valued civic asset. The review also found that the city provides an adequate library service from a functional perspective, but in old assets, and there was definitely a big opportunity to reposition the service and make it a central function of our city through the creation of community hubs, particularly focusing on our foothills, and offering some complementary community services and customer services within those hubs to increase the utilisation of our libraries. So the report the report recommends that we receive and note the library services review in confidential attachment 1, and then we are looking to explore opportunities to integrate the Forestfield Library into a new Woodlapine community hub within the Forestfield Activity Centre precinct, and we would like Council to endorse a strategic direction of that nature so we can get on and explore that as an opportunity. And then the second one would be to transition from the current High Wycombe Library site to co-locate a new library within the district structure plan in the Forestfield North, High Wycombe South, near the train station, as a new contemporary library building. So we'll also consider undertaking and having a look at the internals of our Kalamunda Library over time to improve its amenity and its service provision and program delivery, and also the utilisation of space in terms of that library, and list that to make that a contemporary hub experience as well. And we'll also be looking to explore what new cultural partnerships and joint ventures we can muster into those areas, commercial businesses to reduce our costs of running, and other types of modern innovations that will make the customer experience and service offerings broader, and also to increase that utilisation rate, which is a bit of a problem for us at the moment. So that is the library review. Obviously there are recommendations, a lot of recommendations in the report. We haven't brought all of them to the fore, and we won't be. A lot of them are operational, and we will work with those with our staff to implement those operational ideas that have fallen out of that review. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there any questions, councillors? Councillor Giardina.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just heard the CEO mention that there was the numbers were questionable. Obviously, you know, the usage of the of our facilities, but she didn't say which one. But I noticed that during the course of the last, I think about 4 months ago, we had a gentleman that came through and gave us a bit of a rundown on our libraries. He did bring up Les Moody Library, School Library, where the numbers there were dramatically much lower than the previous time, probably 12 months earlier when we had a review. The numbers are much higher. So, and I did say at the time, I hope you don't use these figures to justify either removing Les Moody Library, School Library, or otherwise. But tonight I'm hearing that we are using, that the numbers, the usage of libraries, albeit that the CEO didn't say which one, it was much less, the usage is much less. Do we know which one?
I was referring to all of them. Our utilisation across all of our libraries are lower than what they are benchmarked against other library uses in the standards in other metropolitan areas. So that was a key part of the report that was presented by the consultant, which is why we want to expand and make them more modern so we can increase that utilisation rate across all of our libraries, Councillor Giardina. I wasn't specifying any library. I would like to see them all have much more participation, all four of them.
Okay, but there's no mention whether we still proceed with Les Moody school libraries? Okay.
No, we're not recommending that. That was a finding of an independent consultant, certainly not our view. We're more focused on getting strategic directions for those community hubs in the foothills. Definitely I would like to have on record that we are pursuing those so I can pursue them, and also to look at our long-term financial plan for how we can, do some renovations up here in Kalamunda. Yeah, and the other things I haven't really brought forward, the partnership things too to look for, but the other things are quite operational. We will work with them within our staff teams to implement, things around staffing, resourcing, etc.
Thanks for clearing that up.
Councillor Ritchie.
I do have concerns about the fact that we only have 25% of the community engaged when the state average is 50%. And I was wondering whether some thought had been given perhaps in a recommendation as to maybe setting ourselves some targets to actually try and actually increase that so that we have something which we can measure it against, whether it would be worth putting a recommendation of 30% in so many years and so on, perhaps.
I'd be happy to set targets, but we would need to first of all allocate the resourcing and the upgrades before we can set the targets. So I think we need to do a bit more work. Let's look at where we go in terms of the exploration of the hubs. Once we know that we're going to be upgrading and we've got those, but then I think we should set targets. Otherwise, I think we're getting the cart before the horse, and we might disappoint ourselves because, other priorities will come up as they always do, and we may not get the funding that we need to make them interesting and the resourcing to do that. We could try it if you insist, but I think there's some risks around that, and I probably want to talk to the library team first before we'd make that sort of commitment. We can always bring that back.
Yeah, I guess my thinking was that even given we've got old buildings, other cities have got old buildings as well, but they do have a higher usage than 25%, and I wouldn't want to think that our increase in that uptake is only predicated if we do all these things. Now, again, it may well be an operational matter. I guess what I'm saying is there some way that we can look within our existing facilities to try and increase that uptake? Could be through a number of, I don't know what the strategies are, but the notion of trying to do that even within our existing buildings as we've got them, because it's very low.
Too low.
Madam Chair, with the, I think going back to what Councillor Ritchie was just saying, would the population have anything to do with it? Because we're relatively a small city. We've got a massive footprint, but the population is not huge compared to, say, Belmont and Canning and Gosnells. They are massive, so we can't really sort of compete with those guys. Would that be a factor?
It's percentage, John.
Okay.
Not numbers.
Okay.
Councillor Sewell.
Thank you. With the consultation that we received some months ago, a significant amount of feedback was provided by councillors and a number of suggestions. I'm not clear as to whether those suggestions and that feedback has been taken on board. In addition to what Councillor Ritchie was saying, such as I think I gave the example back at that time that it was only when I had my own children that I was even aware that there was a library at Les Moody Senior High School, and that perhaps that we did need to look at better promoting the services and facilities that are available. I'm just wondering how did the consultant take on the feedback that councillors provided 4 months ago?
CEO.
I might have to take that on notice. I'm not sure how that was incorporated. I know that certainly there's intent to increase those sorts of, promotional opportunities within the libraries, but I'd have to take that on notice, and I'll provide you with a fuller report from the library services staff in terms of what they're planning around that matter.
And just a follow-up question, are we then expecting that for next week's meeting, or will that be coming at a later date?
I would need to speak to them before to see, what they're doing, but hopefully I could get it back to you for next week. I don't see it being a big question for them.
Are there any other questions, councillors? Follow-up question, councillor?
Sure, I'm just not entirely sure that I would want to take on the recommendations or agree to those recommendations without having that response.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any other questions? I'm not sure whether there's anyone in the gallery. If there are there any questions about the library services report? Mr. Forrest.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, I would like, it's a question, would you please pass on through the CEO to the library, the staff of the Kalamunda Library, the thought that they're very, very efficient, they're very helpful, and they go out of the way to serve the community. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff available online nowadays. That's shrinkage as a result of that. People read online and so on, but they are superb. They really, I think that should be, if you wouldn't mind passing that on.
Thank you. I'll certainly pass that on to them. They'll appreciate that very much. Thank you.
And getting that out there might increase the number of people who go to our library. Thank you, Mr. Forrest. Are there any other questions? No, then we will ask the Manager of Governance to give us a report on the council meeting schedule for 2021.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My comments are very brief. The schedule is as per custom and practice, apart from the October meeting being brought forward to just prior to the local government elections, as was done in 2019, but everything else is as per custom and practice.
Are there any questions, councillors? Thank you. We would like to ask the CEO if she would like to give a report on the corporate business plan quarterly update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is your corporate business plan quarterly update for the quarter July to September. All of the actions in the corporate business plan are tracking currently slightly above the 25% mark, which is good. So obviously everyone is pursuing all of their actions in line with the adopted corporate business plan. And so this is really just, again, for your information and for noting.
Thank you. Are there any questions, councillors? If not, we'll go to the Director of Asset Services about the solar panels and batteries on community lease buildings.
Thank you through the chair, and thank you, Beryl Girl. Okay, so the purpose of this report is to put a draft policy for adoption by council to a policy to support community groups who lease buildings from the city wishing to install solar panels and or battery systems in order to reduce their running costs. The essence being, whilst they may not have the capital reserve themselves to undertake the works, they might, if there was some support for them, then they can undertake the works and then reduce their running costs. The policy proposes that we would allocate up to $20,000 per application, and on the basis that 50% of the grant, i.e. a maximum, if the maximum grant was awarded, that 10,000 of that, or 50%, will be repaid to the city over a 3-year period. This could provide sufficient capital for groups to undertake these cost-saving measures for themselves. The policy also provides that those assets created, be them solar panels and or battery systems, eventually come back to the city as part of the building asset for ongoing maintenance and eventual replacement. The policy also has outlined if there is an application received that doesn't meet the criteria or we haven't a sufficient budget in the relevant financial year, that application is brought back to council for determination. So the recommendation is that council adopt the draft policy and note that we are proposing to list $20,000 in the draft 21-22 budget so that initial applications can be received and processed.
If I could start with the questions, roughly how many buildings might be looking at this? Do you have any idea?
Probably in the order of, we know that there are 2 that have applied and are considering it. We've probably had 6 to 8 community lease buildings throughout the city at the present time.
My other question is, somebody asked me this, I know that CADs have a problem, believe their electricity costs are substantial, and somebody said, will solar panel work there because it's quite shaded?
First of all, yes, it is a fairly shady site, so the efficiency of any solar system on that roof would be questionable. The other issue, of course, CADs being predominantly, when they're back in operation, being a nighttime event, when they need most of their power, they would need to probably supplement that with a battery system so they can use that energy during their operational hours.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor O'Donnell.
I was just wondering if there's an average cost that we're expecting, or we just use 20,000 because we're expecting that it will be 20,000 provided?
Director.
Through the chair, thank you. The answer is it's quite varied because each community building has a different size, shape and need. They could range, an installation could, for a very small building, could be in the order of $6,000 to $10,000, and some of our larger buildings could be in the order of $20,000 to $30,000, depending, of course, if they wish us to install a battery system. But it is a variable depending on the building.
Yeah. The other question, in terms of, purchasing, we will give them the funding, but who is responsible for getting the quotes and all of that process?
The general process would be the club would arrange the quotes and the installation. The city would pass comment over it through the application process to make sure that they meet the criteria set out in the policy, and those other issues to do with making sure the downstream electrical systems are checked and where necessary upgraded, all the things that we would be worried about because it's our building.
Yep. That's it.
Thank you. Councillor Stellard.
It's a bit of a follow-up through the chair. I suppose what we've got is some of the buildings may not be structurally sound enough for a certain number of panels. Who will be responsible? Who do the examining of the structures to make sure that there's a possibility to put the panels on the roof?
Thank you. Through the chair, that would be part of the assessment process, but by and large we're finding they're not real considerations. Most of the roofs don't need any changes to accept solar panels at this point in time.
Are there any other questions, councillors? Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. In the policy, it was talking about a tier 1 and a tier 2 systems. I'm just wondering what's the difference?
Okay, thank you. Through the chair. There are 3 tiers of solar panel installers. A tier 1 company is a very large company that manufactures its own solar panels. A tier 2 company manufactures panels but sources some of the glass, etc., from tier 1 suppliers. A tier 3 solar panel provider is just someone who just goes and buys them off the shelf from someone, puts them together, goes and brings them to the roof and slaps them on. We're very worried that a plethora of tier 3 suppliers, you don't have any control over the quality of the panel, the life cycle, the longevity and the guarantee. So we probably find in practice that predominantly tier 2 suppliers would be the ones supplying to this marketplace. It's to ensure that we're getting reputable solar panels and batteries.
Are there any other questions? Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question is about the, obviously after the 3 years, it becomes the city's asset, or it's city's asset straight away?
The asset passes to care and control of the city at the end of the defects liability period for the installation. Yep. Usually panels and batteries then have an ongoing guarantee or warranty over the componentry, but the asset passes to the city at the end of defects liability. The 3-year period is just the paying back of the grant, the half the grant.
Okay, my follow-up question is, obviously then that building will, for the next 15 years at least, most likely have a solar panel system in place, and the city will be responsible for the care and maintenance of that system?
That's correct.
And potential replacement down the track?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Stallard.
Yes, I'd just like to, I'll make it a question somehow. I'd just like to congratulate the staff on doing this. It's a great initiative, and there's been so much comment and request in the past, and there have been restrictions because of our policy. I was just wondering, is this the start for us to make sure that we put panels on any future developments, city-based developments and buildings, so that we can offset the cost of electricity? And I'm thinking of when we start looking at the part of the rayon, but certainly down in Scott Reserve and those areas, to have solar would be a great advantage, and to have us doing it at the start would be tremendous and make it a bit easier than trying to do it later.
Thank you. Through the Chair, councillors, you may have noted just earlier this evening we had endorsed the how our corporate business plan tracking has been going. You'll notice in there are initiatives under investigation for reducing our carbon footprint and energy costs, which would be, those are the things we'd be exploring in due course.
Councillor Sewell.
Just to address some of Councillor O'Connor's concerns, has there been some kind of cost-benefit analysis done in terms of the expenditure for maintenance, etc., as opposed to the savings, reduction of carbon footprint, etc.?
Thank you. Split the question in two halves, I think would be the best way for me to address that. The maintenance costs of the solar panels themselves is fairly minimal. It's making sure that they're clean, etc. The cost benefit of whether or not a solar system works is in the eyes of the club applying it, because it's their ongoing cost savings that they want to achieve. And putting a cost on carbon footprint is something that's probably subjective at this point in time. The cost plans that usually occur for solar cells and those systems take the carbon credits into account when they do the application.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Is there any questions from the gallery? No. Well, we'll ask the Manager of Community Development to give a report on the federal election commitment at Hartfield Park, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, councillors, members of the community, if there's any left in there, and staff. This particular report seeks council to endorse the City of Kalamunda to submit a grant application to the federal government and to leverage the funding commitment at Hartfield Park as per option 4. Also to note a future CSRFF forward planning grant application to be submitted in September 2021 as per option 4, and to note in the event of a successful CSRFF application, an amount of $383,000 would need to be considered as part of the 2022-23 and 23-24 annual budget deliberation process. To better understand the current situation, it's important to understand some background to this particular situation. So, take you back to 2010, Hartfield Park Master Plan number 1 identified the need to reduce the amount of single-use facilities through co-locating sporting user groups. In recent years, the City has received multiple significant facility development requests from Hartfield Park sporting user groups. In response to these requests, the City engaged a consultant to further investigate co-location opportunities. In May of 2019, the federal government made a $2 million election commitment for the development of sporting infrastructure at Hartfield Park. And as part of that allocation, an amount of $500,000 was specifically committed towards new change rooms at the Forestfield Football Club. It was also a requirement that the City must submit a funding application identifying priority projects within the $2 million allocation by December 2020 to the federal government. So in terms of identifying the priority projects, the consultant has provided a list that has been developed through the progress made thus far of the Hartville Park number 2 study. So we've got 5 key projects listed here, councillors, and they range from the first priority being the AFL Little Athletics Stage 1, which comprises change rooms, universal accessible toilet, first aid room and storage, and a total cost of $921,000. Project 2 was Little Athletics new long jump pits at $66,000. Project 3 was rugby league change rooms, comprising of 2 change rooms, a UAT, first aid room, storage and a refurb at a cost of $1,078,000. Project 4 was the bowling club extension, the first stage, which comprises of a new kitchen, servery, expanded social area at a cost of $472,000. The Project 5 was the second stage of the bowling club extension, which incorporated a co-location with tennis, and comprised of a tennis social area, shared use toilets, change rooms, first aid rooms, storage, and new tennis courts at a cost of $1,020,000. So the value, as you would have ascertained, is that of these combined projects exceeds the $2 million federal government allocation. So to work out how best to allocate the $2 million, 4 funding options were developed and have subsequently been workshopped with councillors. The feedback indicated support for projects that were completed in full as opposed to half completion, and for as many clubs and projects to be supported as possible. We also need to consider that Hartville Park is a registered Aboriginal heritage site, and under the Aboriginal Heritage Act, developments may require approval. This may involve a Section 18 notice and referral to the South West Aboriginal Land and Sea Council, otherwise known as SWASC, and this process has in the past taken up to 12 months' time. In consideration of the anticipated project delivery timeframes, it provides the city with an opportunity to leverage the $2 million funding that has been provided through the federal government and to seek CSRFF funding. The following table outlines each of the 4 options. The second column represents, if I draw your attention to the second column, it represents the number of clubs that would be supported by each of the options. The third column indicates the number of facilities that would be developed. The fourth column is the how much CSRFF would be sought and if it would be sought. So the first 2 options do not include CSRFF, but the third and fourth do. And the fifth column indicates the cost to the city. And finally, the last column is the total project value of each of the options. So the preferred option is option 4. And the rationale behind that decision is that the $2 million is effectively leveraged into $3.557 million total project value. It avoids half-completed projects. 3 projects are completed in full, which effectively results in more clubs being benefited from this proposal. And finally, the city contribution is less than the option 3, which is quite similar, but it's $382,000, and as a forward planning grant, that amount of money can be split over 2 years for the City of Kalamunda to fund. So, therefore, councillors, in summary, it's recommended that council endorse the City of Kalamunda to submit the grant application to the federal government and leverage the funding commitment made at Hartville Park as per option 4, and note that a CSRFF application would be submitted in September of next year, and to also note that a successful CSRFF funding application up to an amount of $382,000 would need to be considered as part of future annual budget deliberation processes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Before we go to questions, councillors, I just need to note some disclosure of interests.
Yeah, thank. Brooke, did you have one? How little athletics? No. Okay. So we've got disclosures of interest from Councillor Stallard because he is a member of the bowling club. It's an impartiality interest. Disclosure from Councillor Cannon. Her husband is a coach at the football club and a committee member. and Councillor Boyd is a coach of the football club, declaring an impartiality interest as well.
We'll go to questions, councillors. I have a question. Sorry, Councillor Boyd. One is that, is it the $2 million safe if we wait till we get the grant money from CSRFF? And my second question is, how confident are you that we will get that money?
Thank you for the question. Yes, the funding would still be safe. We have until 2026 to acquit the $2 million funding. In terms of the second question, sorry, could you repeat that one for me?
Are you confident that we will get the other money? CS.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for the question. So we've been in discussion with the what was the Department of Sport and Recreation to discuss the CSRFF proposals, and certainly, whilst it is a competitive funding process, there is priorities based around female and unisex change rooms, and that certainly is a large component of what we're putting forward. And all of the projects are fundable through CSRFF. It's just that it is a competitive funding program.
Thank you. Councillors, Councillor O'Donnell. Do you have a question?
Sorry, my train of thought. Can you just explain that with the Aboriginal Section 18 process, that basically that there's not going to be any ability to look at the other options because of the timeframes?
Thank you for the question. So, as I mentioned through the presentation, Hartfield Park is a registered Aboriginal heritage site, so therefore under the Aboriginal Heritage Act it requires approvals in accordance with the Act. Our experience with previous applications is such that these applications can take up to 12 months in time, and as a result of that, so if I step out the process from here, we would need to engage with the federal government to develop a funding agreement, so that could take anywhere up to 4 months is what we anticipate for that funding agreement to take place. That would take us up to April, May of next year, and at that time is when we would be able to submit an application for development approvals on that site and seek approval for that. So a CSRFF application would be submitted in September of 2021. An outcome would be expected early 2022, which would coincide with the anticipated results of the timeframes for the Aboriginal heritage approvals.
Thank you. Councillor O'Donnell, you've got a follow-up?
Sorry, my brain's a bit switched off tonight. The other question, that if, for instance, we were to apply for the CSRFF and just say, for instance, we didn't get that funding or all the funding, that we could actually vary the application for the federal funds to then look at what other options, i.e. 1, 2, 3 or something else that might come up in that time. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you for the question. So if we were to be unsuccessful for the CSRFF application, certainly that presents an opportunity for the city to review all available options at that particular point in time and consider whether or not there's been any other opportunities that have arisen in the meantime, which may be through other advocacy efforts, and we can again revisit that, and it wouldn't affect the $2 million funding.
Before we go to Councillor Boyd, I believe there's another disclosure of interest.
Yes, you're correct, Madam Mayor. Councillor Blair has declared a impartiality interest because he's a member of soccer.
Councillor Boyd, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just keen to find out whether it's common practice or whether the city could potentially come under criticism. Obviously, the $2 million is, let's say, gifted money, it's money that's been given to the city. Are we like to come under criticism for trying to use that money to leverage other money, other grants money?
Manager?
Thank you for the question. I would like to think that we would be, that it would be seen as a smart play by the city in terms of using that money to better our position, which ultimately is about bettering the position for our community and our sporting clubs and getting more projects completed through the use of that $2 million that has been afforded to us.
Thank you. Councillor O'Connor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up from that previous question, so Darren, is that something that other local governments have done before? Is they leverage previous grants for new grants?
Thank you for the question. I couldn't speak on behalf of other local governments. However, it would seem prudent to me to explore all opportunities to leverage whatever dollars come the way of your local government and ultimately benefiting your community and your sporting clubs.
Through the chair, I think that it has happened. Like the Coburn Arc was a cocktail of federal funding, state funding, CSRRF funding, Dockers funding. So yeah, there are examples. I'm sure I could find a lot more for you. Everyone is trying to leverage every cent they can from every possibility they can these days.
Follow-up question, Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you. So just going back to the timeline with the Aboriginal approvals, so whether we looked at option 2 or option 4, is it your assessment that we couldn't actually have machinery on ground any sooner with option 2?
Yeah, thank you for the question. We are, I guess, using our best efforts to try to determine what those timeframes could be. Of course, that is outside of our control, but what we are trying to convey to Council is we anticipate that these timeframes can take approximately that length of time, which would indicate to us that it gives an opportunity to explore the CSRFF opportunity and not affect the timeframes too significantly from what would be expected through option 2.
And last follow-up, please. Have you had any discussions, following up from a previous question, about the whether this leveraging proposal would be well received?
Point of clarity, well received by whom?
Councillor O'Connor, do you mean
Sorry, my
received by
question
the clubs?
To the manager, by the CSRRF.
Manager?
Certainly we've explained to them the situation that the city is currently in, and so they're well aware of the fact that what we're proposing to do and leveraging that money. So it certainly is not anything that precludes us from doing this. It is somewhat normal for them to simply understand where does the funding come from. So what is the funding split that makes up the full total project cost.
Councillor Sewell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a point of clarity. I guess I'm a bit confused as to why a federal government and a state government wouldn't want the best productive outcome for a community, given that they're all constituents of that community. I'm very confused by the line of questioning.
Sorry, Councillor Sewell, the line of questioning, are you referring to the questions being asked of the manager, or have you got a question for the manager?
So I'm just wanting to clarify the line of questioning by councillors in terms of whether it's appropriate for leveraging to occur. I'm just confused as to why it wouldn't be appropriate if that was the best outcome for that community. I'm
Well,
confused.
the officers and the administration's view is that we don't see a problem. We see that it is beneficial. We see that leveraging is, maximising the ratepayers' dollars. The ratepayers aren't paying for this, and this is potentially $3.5 million we could get as opposed to $2 million, as opposed to us paying for any of it.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Boyd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just note in the report at item 21, it indicates that the project may require a Section 18 notice, which obviously indicates that it may not. Have we thought of going to the South West Aboriginal Land and Sea Council to have a preliminary discussion? Because obviously if they're not going to require us, if a Section 18 notice isn't going to be required, then obviously there's not going to be the lengthy 12 months wait that the city's indicating there will be, and therefore the delay won't be there that the city's anticipating, which is obviously reflected, and why the recommendation has been given as it is.
Manager?
Thank you for the question. We haven't been in contact with them at this point in time. However, what we have applied is our historical knowledge of how long applications have taken in the past.
Are there any other questions? Councillor O'Donnell?
So I was just rereading again. Obviously with the Aboriginal Heritage Act likely to be replaced, that's obviously going to be a factor that will likely, I guess, err on the side of caution in regards to the use of Section 18. I know you don't know that because that's not your thing, but I'm just, I'm just assuming like that, if they're going to replace the Act, that, they're not going to, if they do, of course.
Through the chair, I might be able to field that. As is custom and practice with the legislature, where they do have a new act that replaces an old act, there is also always transitional arrangements put in place. We don't know what those transitional replacement arrangements will be for the Aboriginal Heritage Act 2021.
Are there any other questions? Is there any questions from the gallery? If not, we'll declare the meeting closed at 8:15. Thank you very much, councillors.
Excuse me.